The warm glow of the late afternoon sun spilled over the bustling city streets as she stepped out of her car, heels clicking confidently on the pavement. Her dark, flawless skin shimmered under the sunlight, and her posture exuded an aura of self-assurance. She adjusted her tailored blazer, its sleek lines hugging her frame perfectly, and glanced up at the towering structure of the high-end boutique. It was a store known for its exclusivity, a place where the wealthy flaunted their status and indulged in luxury. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. This wasn't just a shopping trip. It was something more. It was a moment she had envisioned countless times, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of what was about to unfold. The glass doors slid open as she approached, the scent of expensive leather and high-end perfume wafting out to greet her. Inside, polished floors gleamed, and the walls were lined with perfectly arranged displays of handbags, shoes, and designer apparel. Each item carried a price tag that would make most people pause, but not her. Today, she was here with purpose, her strides long and purposeful. The sales staff, clad in tailored uniforms, cast quick glances in her direction. Some smiled politely, but others exchanged barely concealed whispers. She could feel their eyes following her, taking in every detail of her appearance, from her immaculate hair to the designer purse draped over her shoulder. But she noticed something else, a tension in the air, an unspoken judgment lingering just beneath the surface. She made her way to a display of handbags, her fingers grazing the smooth leather of a sleek black clutch. Before she could pick it up, a young sales associate approached, her polished smile failing to hide the condescension in her tone. "Excuse me, Mom," the associate said, her voice saccharine sweet but firm. "I think you might feel more comfortable shopping at one of our other locations. This boutique specializes in exclusive clientele." Her heart sank for a brief moment, but she quickly masked it with a composed smile. She tilted her head slightly, studying the associate's expression. There it was again, that invisible line drawn by assumptions and prejudices. It wasn't the first time she had encountered this, and sadly, it probably wouldn't be the last. "Is there something wrong with me being here?" she asked calmly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. The associate's smile faltered. "It's just, well, some of our items might be out of reach for most people. We try to maintain an environment where everyone feels comfortable." She let out a quiet laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. "Comfortable? And what makes you think I can't afford to shop here?" The associate hesitated, clearly caught off guard, but before she could respond, another employee, a man with a perfectly styled haircut and a crisp suit, stepped in. His demeanor was even colder, his eyes scanning her as though she were an uninvited guest. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," he said curtly. "We reserve the right to decline service if we feel someone is not a good fit for our brand." The words hit her like a slap, but she refused to let them see the hurt. Instead, she stood taller, her presence commanding the room. A small crowd of other customers had started to gather, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. "Not a good fit," she repeated, her voice rising slightly but remaining measured. "Do you always make assumptions about your customers before learning anything about them?" The man's expression didn't change. "We have policies in place to protect the integrity of our clientele and ensure the exclusivity of our merchandise." Her hands clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to remain composed. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her lose her temper. Instead, she took a step closer, her voice dropping to a tone that was firm yet calm. "Your policies don't protect integrity. They enforce ignorance," she said, her words sharp and deliberate. For a moment, there was silence. The tension in the room was palpable, and the crowd continued to grow. Some murmured amongst themselves, their expressions ranging from discomfort to outrage. "Ma'am," the associate interjected, her tone now defensive. "We're simply trying to ensure that our customers have the best experience possible." "And you think the best experience means judging someone by how they look before they've even opened their mouth?" She fired back. The man in the suit opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off, her voice carrying the weight of years of resilience and determination. You know what? You're absolutely right. This store isn't a good fit for me or anyone else who values respect and decency. But don't worry, I'll make sure I never have to deal with this again. With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers behind her grew louder, but she ignored them, refusing to let their words stick to her. She had bigger plans now, ones that went far beyond buying a handbag. As she stepped back into the sunlight, she pulled out her phone and made a call. The voice on the other end was familiar and warm, one of her trusted business advisors. "Cancel my afternoon meeting," she said firmly. "I need to handle something urgent." The advisor hesitated. "Are you sure? It's an important client." "I'm sure," she replied. "And trust me, this will be worth it." She ended the call and looked back at the boutique, its pristine facade glinting in the sunlight. A small smile played on her lips, not of satisfaction, but of determination. Inside that store, they had seen only what they wanted to see: a stereotype, a label, a narrative that fit their narrow perspective. What they didn't see was the woman behind the tailored blazer, a self-made entrepreneur, a visionary, and someone who never allowed anyone to define her worth. She was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The next few days were a whirlwind. She made calls, set meetings, and worked late into the night, fueled by a mix of frustration and purpose. This wasn't just about the store anymore. It was about breaking barriers and challenging the systems that allowed such treatment to persist. Finally, the day arrived. She returned to the boutique, this time with a team of lawyers and advisors in tow. The staff inside froze as she entered, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. "Can we help you?" the man in the suit asked, his voice tinged with unease. She smiled, but it wasn't the warm, friendly smile of someone looking to shop. It was the smile of someone who had just changed the rules of the game. "Actually," she said, her tone calm but authoritative, "I'm here to finalize a transaction. You see, as of this morning, this building belongs to me." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. The staff exchanged stunned glances, and even the customers paused, their eyes wide with disbelief. "And don't worry," she continued, her voice carrying a quiet power. "I have no intention of keeping things the way they are. Starting today, this store will reflect the values it pretends to uphold: respect, inclusivity, and integrity. You can either get on board with that or find another place to work." The man stammered, his usual composure shattered. "This must be some kind of misunderstanding." "You know, misunderstanding," she interrupted, her gaze steady. "You judged me without knowing anything about me. But I'm not here to hold grudges. I'm here to set an example. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot of work to do." As she turned and walked away, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about proving a point. It was about creating change. The store she had once been denied entry to was now a symbol of what could happen when someone refused to accept the limits placed on them by others. And as she stepped back into the sunlight, she knew this was only the beginning. The world was watching, and she was ready to show them what true success looked like. The city buzzed with a life of its own as she made her way to her bar. The voices of pedestrians, the honking of horns, and the rhythmic hum of traffic created a symphony of urban energy that she had grown used to over the years. Yet today, everything seemed quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what she would do next. She slid into the driver's seat and rested her hands on the steering wheel, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. It wasn't just about buying a building or proving a point. It was about everything that had brought her to this moment. The struggles, the triumphs, the battles she'd fought to be taken seriously in a world that often underestimated her. Her journey hadn't been an easy one. Born in a neighborhood where opportunities were few and far between, she had learned the value of perseverance early on. Her parents had worked tirelessly to give her and her siblings a chance at a better life, instilling in her a work ethic that had become the foundation of her success. She thought back to the days when she'd spent hours at the public library, poring over books about business and finance while her friends played outside. There had been nights when she'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table, her notebooks filled with plans and ideas that seemed impossibly out of reach at the time. But she had always believed in herself, even when others didn't. That belief had carried her through college, where she'd been one of the few students from her background in her program. It had driven her to work 3 jobs while attending classes, to endure sleepless nights, and to navigate the unspoken challenges that came with being a young black woman in predominantly white spaces. She'd faced skepticism, doubt, and outright discrimination, but she'd refused to let any of it stop her. Her first break had come when she launched a small consulting firm from her tiny apartment. It hadn't been glamorous. She'd worked from a second-hand desk, answering calls on a phone with a cracked screen, but she poured her heart into the business, and slowly it began to grow. Her clients appreciated her sharp mind and unwavering determination, and before long, she was landing contracts that had once seemed like distant dreams. Now, years later, she was a force to be reckoned with in the business world. She had built a name for herself, earned the respect of her peers, and amassed a fortune that she had never flaunted but had worked tirelessly for. And yet, despite all her success, moments like the one in that boutique reminded her that there were still battles to be fought. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was her assistant, checking in about the next steps for the building acquisition. She took a deep breath before answering, her voice calm and measured as she gave instructions. There was no room for hesitation now. She had to move quickly, not just to secure the deal, but to ensure that her vision for the store would come to life. Later that evening, she sat in her penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling like stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She sipped a cup of tea as she reviewed the documents spread out on the table before her. The purchase agreement was straightforward, but the real work would come afterward, assembling a team, implementing her changes, and rebranding the store into something that reflected her values. Her mind wandered back to the staff at the boutique. She didn't want to fire anyone outright, even though their behavior had been appalling. Instead, she wanted to give them a chance to prove themselves, to rise above their biases and learn the value of treating everyone with dignity. It wouldn't be easy, but she believed in second chances. As the night stretched on, she found herself reflecting on what this moment meant. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been judged, underestimated, or turned away because of who they were. It was about challenging the systems and attitudes that allowed such treatment to persist. The next morning, she arrived at the boutique with her team in tow. The staff, clearly uneasy, greeted her with forced smiles. She could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty of what her presence meant for their future. But she wasn't here to instill fear. She was here to inspire change. She called a meeting, gathering the employees in the store's main showroom. The polished floors and glittering displays seemed almost out of place as she stood before them, her voice steady and clear. "I know some of you are wondering why I'm here," she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Let me be clear. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to create something better, something that reflects the values we should all strive to uphold." The employees exchanged uncertain glances, but she pressed on, her tone firm but compassionate. "This store will no longer be a place where people are judged or turned away based on assumptions. It will be a place of inclusivity, respect, and excellence. And I'm giving each of you the opportunity to be part of that change." There was a pause, the weight of her words settling over the room. Some looked relieved, others apprehensive. She could see the gears turning in their minds, the realization that this wasn't just about a new owner. It was about a new way of doing things. "Those of you who are willing to embrace this vision will have my full support," she continued. "But let me be clear. There will be no room for prejudice or disrespect. If you're not willing to change, "This isn't the place for you." The silence that followed was heavy, but she could see a few nods, a few glimmers of understanding in their eyes. It was a start. As the meeting concluded, she walked through the store, observing the displays and taking notes on what needed to be changed. She could feel the staff's eyes on her, their curiosity mingled with unease. She didn't mind. She knew it would take time to earn their trust and reshape the culture of the store. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm, unaware of the small revolution taking place within the boutique's walls. But she knew that word would spread. People would talk about the woman who had walked into a high-end store, been turned away, and returned as its owner. She smiled to herself as she stepped outside, the sunlight warm on her skin. This was only the beginning. The real work was just getting started, and she was ready for it. As she looked up at the building, its sleek lines cutting against the sky, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about a store. It was about rewriting the narrative, proving that success wasn't determined by where you came from or what others thought of you. It was about showing the world what could happen when someone refused to accept the limits placed on them. And deep down, she knew this moment would be remembered, not just by her, but by everyone who saw what she had done and realized they could do the same. The days that followed were anything but smooth. Word of her ownership spread quickly, and it wasn't long before the store became the center of public attention. Customers began pouring in, some curious, others skeptical, all wondering what changes this new chapter would bring. But the pressure was mounting, and she could feel it. Every decision she made was under scrutiny, every move watched closely by a public eager to see how the story would unfold. Inside the store, tension simmered. Some of the employees were adjusting to the new expectations, while others resisted, their resentment barely concealed. The whispers behind her back, the occasional cold stares, it was all part of the challenge she had prepared herself for. She wasn't surprised by it, but that didn't make it any easier to endure. One afternoon, as she reviewed the plans for the store's rebranding, her assistant approached with a stack of customer feedback reports. The comments were a mixed bag, some praising the changes she had already implemented, others critical, with complaints ranging from pricing to the new policies on inclusivity. One note, written in bold red ink, caught her eye. It read, "You'll never belong here. This place isn't for people like you." The words stung more than she wanted to admit. For a moment, she sat still, staring at the paper, the weight of her mission pressing heavily on her chest. She thought of all the moments in her life when she'd been told she didn't belong, all the times she'd had to fight to prove her worth. This was no different. It wasn't just about proving herself, it was about proving them wrong. Later that evening, as she prepared to leave the store, she noticed one of the newer employees, a young woman, lingering near the display window. She seemed nervous, hesitant, as if she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Approaching her gently, she asked if everything was okay. The woman hesitated before confessing that she was struggling to keep up with the new expectations. "I'm not sure I'm good enough for this," the woman admitted, her voice trembling. "I've never worked in a place like this before, and, well, it feels like I don't belong." Hearing those words struck a chord. She saw a reflection of her younger self in the woman's uncertainty, the same doubts that had haunted her during her early days in business. She offered a reassuring smile and shared a piece of advice her mother had given her long ago. "You belong wherever you decide to be. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The woman's eyes filled with gratitude, and for the first time that day, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the battle wasn't just about proving something to the world. It was also about empowering others to see their own worth. But as the days passed, the challenges only grew. A week after taking ownership, she received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was curt and cold, identifying themselves as a representative of one of the city's most prominent real estate firms. They wanted to buy the building back, offering her a substantial profit. When she declined, the voice turned sharper, warning her that holding onto the property might not be in her best interest. The thinly veiled threat lingered in her mind long after the call ended. She knew she was stepping on toes, challenging an unspoken status quo that had gone unchallenged for years. But she also knew she couldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. Things came to a head one evening when a small group of protesters gathered outside the store, holding signs and chanting slogans that accused her of ruining tradition and changing things that didn't need fixing. The sight of them standing there, their faces filled with anger and defiance, was a stark reminder of just how deeply resistance to change could run. Inside, the employees watched nervously, some openly questioning whether it was worth staying. She addressed them calmly, assuring them that she had no intention of giving up. "This isn't just about a store," she told them. "It's about setting an example, about showing people what's possible when you refuse to let fear or hate dictate your path." But the pressure wasn't just external. Late at night, when the city had quieted down, she would sit in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all bearing down on her. She thought about the long hours, the endless battles, and the constant need to prove herself over and over again. And yet giving up wasn't an option. Not now, when she had come so far. As the store's grand reopening approached, the tension reached a boiling point. Some of the employees were still unsure of her vision. The protesters outside grew louder, and the messages she received became increasingly hostile. She knew the stakes had never been higher. Every detail had to be perfect, every decision flawless. The eyes of the city, and perhaps the world, were on her. On the eve of the reopening, she stood in the center of the store, taking in the transformation that had taken weeks to accomplish. The displays were vibrant and inviting, reflecting a modern elegance that welcomed everyone, regardless of who they were or where they came from. The space felt alive, pulsing with energy and possibility. But even as she admired the results, she knew the hardest part was yet to come. Tomorrow, the doors would open, and the world would decide whether she had succeeded or failed. The anticipation was almost unbearable, the weight of expectations pressing down on her like never before. She glanced at her reflection in the polished glass of the display case, seeing not just the determined woman she had become, but also the little girl who had once dreamed of moments like this. She thought of all the people who had doubted her, all the voices that had told her she didn't belong. This was her answer to them. The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, casting a golden glow over the streets, she stood outside the store, her heart pounding. The crowd that had gathered was larger than she had expected, a mix of curious onlookers, supportive friends, and skeptical critics. Cameras flashed, reporters jotted down notes, and the air buzzed with anticipation. She took a deep breath, her hand steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. This was the moment she had worked so hard for, the culmination of years of struggle and determination. And as she reached for the keys to unlock the doors, she knew that whatever happened next, she was ready. As the doors to the store swung open, the crowd surged forward, eager to see what awaited inside. Reporters shouted questions, their cameras aimed directly at her, but she ignored them, focusing instead on the reactions of the people stepping into the newly revamped space. Their eyes widened with surprise, their murmurs of approval rippling through the crowd. The elegance of the design, the thoughtful touches that celebrated diversity and inclusivity, it all seemed to resonate. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the smallest flicker of relief, but just as quickly, the tension returned. She knew better than to assume the battle was over. This was just the beginning. Inside, the store buzzed with activity as shoppers explored the space, some admiring the new collections while others exchanged whispers behind their hands. She stayed in the background, observing, her heart pounding with every critical glance and skeptical look. Then, amidst the hum of conversation, she overheard something that made her stomach twist. "Did you hear? They're saying she's already in over her head. There's no way she can handle this place long term." The voice belonged to a man in an expensive suit, his tone dripping with condescension. He wasn't addressing anyone in particular, but his words were meant to be heard. Nearby, a small group of similarly dressed individuals nodded in agreement, their disdain evident. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to remain calm. This wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated, and it wouldn't be the last. But before she could move away, one of the men turned and addressed her directly. "Impressive display," he said, his smile thin and insincere. "But I can't help wondering, how long do you think you can keep this up? This isn't exactly your usual territory, is it?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to let him see any sign of doubt. "Long enough to prove you wrong," she replied, her voice firm. The man's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He gave a small nod, as if acknowledging her resolve, before turning away. The encounter left her shaken, but there was no time to dwell on it. A commotion near the entrance caught her attention, and as she moved closer, she realized the protesters had returned. This time, they weren't content to remain outside. A group of them had entered the store, their presence loud and confrontational. They carried signs with slogans like "Keep Tradition Alive" and "This Isn't Your Place." The atmosphere grew tense as customers paused to watch, unsure of what would happen next. Employees exchanged nervous glances, their unease palpable. She stepped forward, her heart racing, and addressed the group directly. "You're welcome to voice your opinions," she said, keeping her tone calm and measured. "But I want to allow disruption or disrespect in this space. If you have something to say, we can talk. Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave." The leader of the group, a woman with a sharp voice and an air of defiance, stepped forward. "Talk," she scoffed. "What's there to talk about? You don't belong here. You've already ruined what this place stood for." The words stung, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she met the woman's glare with quiet determination. "What this place stood for was exclusion," she said. "What it stands for now is opportunity, for everyone." The crowd around them had gone silent, all eyes on the confrontation. The tension was almost unbearable, the air thick with unspoken challenges. And then, just as it seemed the protesters might escalate further, a voice rang out from the back of the store. "She's right," a customer said, stepping forward. "This place feels better now. It feels welcoming. Isn't that what really matters?" The unexpected support sent a ripple through the crowd, and for the first time, the protesters seemed uncertain. The leader hesitated, her resolve faltering, before turning and signaling her group to leave. They exited without another word, leaving behind a room filled with a mix of relief and unease. But just as she thought the situation was under control, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from the real estate firm that had tried to buy the building. A message that changed everything. The text was simple but chilling. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Walk away, or we'll make you regret it." Her chest tightened as she read the words again, the threat as clear as it was unsettling. She looked around the store, at the employees working diligently, the customers exploring the space, the energy of possibility that filled the air. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let fear drive her decisions now. But as she tucked her phone back into her pocket, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. The message lingered in her mind like a storm cloud. She sat in her office late that night, the store quiet and still after a long day. The buzz of the earlier drama had faded, but the threat loomed large in her thoughts. She had faced adversity before, but this felt different, personal, calculated, and dangerous. Yet she refused to back down. If anything, it only strengthened her resolve to protect what she had built. The next morning, she arrived at the store early, a new energy propelling her forward. She gathered her team for an impromptu meeting, explaining the challenges they might face, but also emphasizing the importance of their work. They listened intently, their loyalty shining through. She could see the determination in their eyes, a reflection of her own. They weren't just employees, they were allies in this fight. As the day unfolded, the store hummed with activity, the usual mix of curious shoppers, loyal supporters, and a few skeptics. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. She had a feeling the real estate firm wasn't finished, and she was right. By mid-afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside the store. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, his expression cold and calculating as he strode through the entrance. She recognized him immediately. He was one of the firm's top executives, someone who rarely showed up unless it was absolutely necessary. His presence sent a ripple through the space, customers pausing to watch as he approached her with a thin smile. "I'm here to make one final offer," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Sell the building, walk away, and this all goes away. No more protests, no more threats. You get to keep your reputation intact." Her jaw tightened as she met his gaze. "And if I say no?" The man's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Then we'll escalate. You've already seen a taste of what we're capable of. Do you really want to push this further?" The room had gone quiet, the weight of the confrontation settling over every one. She could feel the eyes of her staff and customers on her, their silent support giving her the strength to stand her ground. "I've come too far to back down now," she said, her voice steady. "This building isn't just a business, it's a symbol, and no amount of money or intimidation is going to change that." The man's smile vanished, replaced by a cold glare. He leaned in closer, his voice low. "You'll regret this." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out, his departure as abrupt as his arrival. The tension lingered even after he was gone, but she refused to let it consume her. She had made her choice, and she would face whatever came next head-on. That night, as she reviewed the day's sales and prepared for the week ahead, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from a social media account she had never seen before. The post featured a video of her confrontation with the executive, captured by a customer who had been in the store. The caption read, "When they try to intimidate you, but you stand your ground like a boss." The video had already gone viral, with thousands of comments pouring in from people around the world. Messages of support, admiration, and solidarity flooded her notifications, each one a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. The video's reach was staggering, drawing attention to her story in a way she could never have imagined. But along with the praise came something unexpected. A well-known entrepreneur, famous for supporting small businesses and fighting against corporate greed, had shared the video with a personal message. "This is what resilience looks like. Let's show her we've got her back." Within hours, donations began pouring in to support her store, along with offers of legal assistance, marketing advice, and even partnerships. What had started as a local struggle had become a global movement, with people rallying around her cause. The next day, the store was busier than ever, the energy electric as customers and supporters filled the space. Even the media had taken notice, reporters lining up outside for interviews. She felt a wave of gratitude and disbelief as she watched it all unfold. Somehow, what had felt like an impossible battle was now a turning point. But just as she allowed herself to breathe, another message arrived. This one was different, cryptic and anonymous. "They're desperate. Be careful who you trust." Her stomach twisted as she read the words, the warning sending a chill down her spine. She couldn't ignore the possibility that the firm might have another move up their sleeve. And as she looked around at the bustling store, she realized the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who believed in her vision, who had placed their trust in her. She knew the fight wasn't over. But now, she had an army of supporters behind her and a renewed sense of purpose driving her forward. Whatever came next, she was ready, or at least she hoped she was. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The store became a hub not only for shoppers, but also for people who wanted to show their support. Strangers traveled from nearby towns and even other cities to visit, offering words of encouragement, purchasing items, or simply standing in solidarity. It was overwhelming in the best way, and she couldn't help but feel deeply moved by how her story had brought people together. However, the anonymous warning still lingered in her mind. Every new face that entered the store made her wonder if they were there for her or against her. She took precautions, quietly hiring security to keep an eye on the building and ensure that everyone inside felt safe. It wasn't paranoia. It was just the reality of standing up against powerful opponents. The media coverage continued to grow, painting her as a symbol of resilience and determination. Interviews, articles, and TV segments told her story to millions, and the pressure on the real estate firm began to mount. Public sentiment had shifted dramatically, and the firm's tactics were being scrutinized in ways they hadn't anticipated. The video of her confrontation with the executive became a rallying cry for small business owners everywhere, and suddenly, the firm found themselves facing not just her but a tide of public outrage. But the firm wasn't ready to back down quietly. One afternoon, as the store buzzed with activity, she received an envelope marked confidential. Inside was a letter from the firm's legal team, threatening to sue her for defamation unless she publicly apologized and agreed to negotiate a sale. It was a bold move, but it reeked of desperation. They were trying to use fear to regain control of the narrative. She took the letter to the team of lawyers who had offered their services after seeing her story go viral. They reviewed it carefully, their expressions calm but serious. After a long discussion, they assured her that the letter was nothing more than a scare tactic. The firm had no real case, and any attempt to sue her would likely backfire spectacularly. Armed with their advice, she decided to take a stand once again. This time, she wrote an open letter to her supporters, explaining the situation and reaffirming her commitment to keeping the building. She shared her vision for the store, emphasizing its importance not just as a business, but as a symbol of community, perseverance, and hope. The letter struck a chord, going viral within hours and drawing even more support. The final blow to the firm came unexpectedly. A group of prominent activists and influential figures, inspired by her story, launched a campaign to investigate the firm's dealings. They uncovered a pattern of questionable practices, including other attempts to intimidate small business owners. The revelations sparked outrage, and the firm's reputation crumbled almost overnight. Facing mounting pressure, they quietly withdrew their offer and issued a vague statement about re-evaluating priorities. When she heard the news, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The fight was finally over. She had stood her ground, and it had paid off in ways she never could have imagined. But more than that, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for everyone who had supported her along the way. This victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had believed in her and stood by her side. With the conflict behind her, she turned her focus back to the store. She used the funds raised during the campaign to expand, adding new features and programs that reflected the community's needs and values. The store became a beacon of hope and a gathering place for people from all walks of life. It was more than she had ever dreamed it could be. In the end, what had started as an act of discrimination and intimidation had transformed into something beautiful. She had taken a stand not just for herself, but for every small business owner, every underdog, and every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. Her story became a testament to the power of resilience, community, and the belief that sometimes standing up for what's right can change everything. As she stood outside the store one evening, watching the lights twinkle against the backdrop of the city, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been hard, but it had also been worth it. And though she didn't know what the future would hold, she knew one thing for sure: she was ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of something greater.